Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the overall economic outlook of Pakistan. And yesterday, the two ministers, Mr. Hamad Azhar, the Minister for Energy, and also Mr. Asad Umar, they both in fact talked about the numbers. And interestingly, we found out now that the growth rate of our economy is around 5.37% according to the revised data that we have received, and that said that during the time between April and June, the large-scale manufacturing almost grew by more than 10%, and that resulted in this particular growth. Now, when we talk about a couple of other very important factors that also include that during the last 14 years, this is the first time that we have hit the number 5, I mean, as far as the economic progress is concerned. And at the same time, looking at the per capita income now, that is estimated at $1,666. And the overall size of the economy is estimated at $346 billion. So that's a big number, because earlier it was hovering around 300, and that's what we got to know, but this is the new number. And again, I would also say that these are the numbers, they are suggested by the Federal Bureau of Statistics. Earlier, our projection for the growth rate of the year 2021-2022 was at 3.9%, and even prior to that it was much lower. But when you look at this number, this is pretty decent. But still, according to a lot of analysts, Pakistan still has to maintain at least 7% growth rate for the next 30 years in order to provide the job opportunity to the youth, that bulge that is going to be there. Either they are unemployed or they are underemployed. This is a reality. Now, a lot of initiatives have been taken by the government of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, but still a lot more needs to be done. So there are a lot of figures that I have, but we'll be definitely talking about that with our panelists. But before that, our production team has prepared a report. Let's watch that. So we'll just be showing you the report, but before that, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. Now, we have with us in our studio on my right is Faheem Sardar Saab, Senior Policy Specialist, and he is also a Senior Economist. Thank you very much for your time. And we have with us Dr. Manzoor Ahmed Saab. He is the former Ambassador of WTO, World Trade Organization. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. And we also have with us Sana Tawfiq. She is joining us on Skype from Karachi. Lady is an economist and associated with RF Habib Limited. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your time also. Now, starting off from you, Sardar Saab, the number 5.37, how surprising was that for you?
Interesting is more the word, because this is a revision of the baseline, and whenever something is revised, you have to take it with a pinch of salt as well as with a bit of a dose of reality. Why am I saying that? Sometimes when you revise, statistics have to be revised with time. Statistics have to make sense over time. There is a natural skew that does come into statistics over long periods. So you see these rebasings, realignments, you have the adjustments and things like that. Because once I was dealing with big data at the stock exchange level, I realized you have to really look at statistics as something more in a more dynamic fashion rather than a more static fashion. So I'm not entirely sure why exactly this was revised, but I believe there must be some reason for it. It's not something willy-nilly that the government is going to do. For us, we see we're just being, cautiously optimistic. How is this really what's happening in the economy? And that's partially true. There are some challenges which we've just been focusing on a little bit too much, and that's usually what sort of garners more of the airwaves these days. But when any statistic is rebased, there has to be logic to it. And if there is logic, then that's the way you accept it. If one big test of a rebasing is its sustainability and its ability to make sense. If it is not making sense, then that rebasing is not correct. If it is making sense, then that means it was something which was most probably overdue. So for the time being, the government has taken a decision. The government feels that this is more appropriate, this is more accurate. We have to take it as it is. Of course, we have to monitor it. And we have to be honest with ourselves that if this is the truth, then fine. That's the way it is. But if there's a mistake that's been made somewhere, we should go for a
But
reversal.
sir, the difference is around 1.5%, and that's not a joke.
It's huge. And it's quite a lot, because 5.4% growth, GDP growth, is actually pretty strong in a COVID, and we're still in a COVID environment, by the way.
Today was the highest number of cases reported.
Exactly. And you're coming out of a very severe COVID 2 years. You see, we've learned to deal with COVID. We've learned to sort of, keep our economy moving, but that does not mean you're out of the woods. That does not mean things are, all fine. So if you're growing at, let's say, 5.4, that's fantastic. What I do is I would like to sort of say, okay, reduce it by, for discussion's sake, reduce it by a percentage and a half, reduce it by 2%. You're still growing. You're still growing. You're not growing as fast as we want, but we're still, the country has come out of a very tough situation. We've had COVID, we've had locusts, we've had problems with India, that is expensive as well. Then we've had to help with the Afghanistan people, with Afghanis, that's expensive as well. Even then, if you're growing, that means the country is at least on the right track. Yeah, we have issues of inflation, we have issues of fiscal balance.
12.3% is what the government says is the inflation rate, sir. 12.3%.
It's food inflation, primarily fueled by fuel inflation. So, I mean, if we're going to import fuel, that's always going to be a problem. If we were generating 400,000 barrels of oil per day, you wouldn't see this inflation. Most of it would have been sterilized in any case.
Still, even the coal is being imported, sir.
Well, yeah, partially that's true. Yeah, but you see, that's the whole configuration issue. The economy, our economy has been, over the past, I think, 40 years, been configured to be more import-oriented. We have to be more, and the irony is, in all our policies, there is an indigenization clause everywhere. If you're in the petroleum sector, if you're in the auto sector, if you're in the telecom sector, that you're supposed to indigenize, you're supposed to bring your economy up to into a mass production level rather than a mass importer level. So we have that thing in the policy, but we still, for example, when it comes to oil, that is one of the major inflation-causing components. We're still importing oil, and if OPEC prices have now gone up to around about 76 barrels of oil per barrel, sorry, $76 per barrel.
Yeah.
So of course we're going to get hit by that because we're importing most of our oil from Saudi. So we have to balance it out. We have to indigenize, and we have to make sure that we can somehow now move away from this import economy.
I mean, that's the great question, but how? That is the problem, because there is no plan. The government ends up blaming the previous government, that Nawaz Sharif. Friend Dr. Manzoor Ahmed says that, well, good news and bad news. Good news is that 5.37 or 5.57, whatever the number is, because you never know, it could be a different number in the morning, could be a different number in the evening if the growth is taking that kind of a portion hike. But your take, ma'am, on this overall statements issued by Mr. Asad Umar as well as the Energy Mr. Hamad Azad.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. So yes, absolutely. So COVID, going back to 2020-21, so COVID did change the narrative, I would say. So from growth, focus shifted to survival, and we saw global economies coming up with stringent lockdown measures during that period. So Pakistan too also took some containment measures, and against the backdrop of socio-economic damage done by the pandemic, I think this number of 5.37, so basically 5.37 is based on the previous base year, that is 2006, fiscal year 2006. And the current revision in the base year from 2006 to 2016, this number goes up to 5.57. So yes, it is no less than a surprise to see Pakistan's economy, I would say, surpassing expectation and posting such a huge number of growth. So, see, globally, rebasing is done frequently. We saw Bangladesh and India doing it many years ago, and obviously they claimed higher per capita income on the basis of a new base. I know there are some people calling the rebased GDP growth statistical mirage. But I think it is a bit unfair to give it a political spin. So in case of Pakistan, this rebasing is done almost every 10 years. So this was due from 2016. Finally done after a lag of, I would say, around 6 years, but this was long overdue. And talking about the GDP overall, so this time around, despite all those socio-economic challenges, I think Pakistan, as we say, was able to pull off a V-shaped recovery. So it was a well-rounded and I would say a broad-based recovery, and we saw contributions from all quarters of the economy. It's not that only industrial sector performed; it was also the agriculture sector that contributed. We saw a jump in the overall production of important crops. Then we have services sector as well. So that contributes around 60% to the overall GDP. So yes, it was, I would say, well-rounded and a broad-based growth.
All right, but I was going through an economic survey, and that was pretty interesting. What it said was that for the next 30 years, Pakistan should be growing at an average of over 7% for the next 3 decades, because the kind of youth bulge that we have, they will not be accommodated. Either they are unemployed or they are underemployed. And the government cannot produce so many jobs. It has to be the private sector that has to play its role. Now, ma'am, looking at the current scenario, do you think there is some sort of a prospect that, let's forget about the next 30 years, let's talk about the next 3, 4, 5 years. Do you think that the current scenario really gives us hope to grow at that magical number of 7? Because we have only done it twice during the last, let's say, almost 30 years actually, let me put it this way, post 1990.
So yes, definitely, I would say the biggest challenge right now is how sustainable this growth number is. Posting a growth of 5% to 6% in short term, I think won't suffice the purpose. The purpose is or should be a sustainable approach to the overall economic growth. And when we talk about sustainability, so obviously, like you mentioned, providing economic opportunities to the poor, and I think building resilience over here and preparing for the unforeseen circumstances, like for example, right now we are going through a very challenging time, I would say, unprecedented healthcare issues, and then we have got this super cycle of commodities, international commodity prices going up. So I think Pakistan, now is the time that Pakistan should be prepared for this, for challenges that lie ahead. And I know there are certain things that are out of your control or out of anyone's control. So, but we should be sustainable enough to at least provide basic necessities to our, I would say, all classes, income classes, and especially to the low income group. And focus should now be more on providing employment opportunities and on putting forward measures that government intends to undertake to make this growth sustainable. Government has been saying this time and again that the target is to take this growth up to 6% and beyond. So now I think measures or the fiscal measures should be taking place that proves this right, and we are able to go beyond even 6%. So yeah.
So the Minister for Energy claims that We have paid a record debt that was over 10, rather, let me put it this way, between 10 and 11 billion dollars. Forex reserves increased by almost 5 billion. Whether we stole or we asked for or whether we borrowed or whatever, they are there, good enough. And then he also says since the exports increased significantly, that is another very important figure. So he was saying that there was this growth rate achievement of 5.4% during the time of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif also. But he said that since the rest of the indicators were negative, so it was not easy for the government, for any government perhaps, to sustain that. But he says this time it is going to be sustainable. I mean, that's a great achievement if they have done so. But so looking at the future, the kind of borrowed payments we are talking about, the kind of oil supply and the terms and conditions that we have, the kind of money that we have in fact gotten from the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia for that matter, and those terms and conditions are much more worse, let me say, than even the IMF conditions. To be very honest, I mean, let's be honest to the public also. Now, sir, in those circumstances, whatever the minister is saying, and we believe him, let's suppose, do you think the next year, for example, that is going to be the last year of this government, they really have to come up with some decent numbers, maybe better than these ones? We would like to see 7% growth, maybe beyond that. Is that a sustainable target? Are these the attainable objectives that they have in their mind, or perhaps they are forecasting a little too much?
Okay, a little point that I have to clarify. Taking a loan is typically not a good idea, but taking a loan is not that bad an idea as well, because it's easy financing, it helps you. As long as you're earning more than your payments,
good enough,
it's fine. So that's what Pakistan has been doing, refinancing its liabilities. Yes, we are facing issues on that front, but I can quote minimum 5 examples across the earth of countries that we call liquid and very prosperous, who have a worse debt situation than our statistics show. That's not the point of this discussion. If the government says that we have grown by more than, let's say, I'm just going to round this off. Okay? If the government says that our GDP growth has been rebased and it's close to 5.5, next year is going to be even better. Your question is this going to be sustainable? It will be sustainable if the policy remains intact, if the system remains intact, if violence is controlled, if the people are continuously brought back into the economic fold. What does that mean? Due to persistent violence in Pakistan, very calculated, carefully planned violence in Pakistan, people suffered in economic areas. That's what really brought Pakistan's economy down. I think I shared this with you before as well. Right now, according to estimates that I've done myself, our economy should be close to $450 billion. Now, this might sound outrageous, but if you look at the statistics, that's exactly what would have happened.
And you're just only focusing on the documented one.
I'm just focusing on the documented one, and I'm not bringing in any assumptions or this or that. I'm just taking a simple regression line.
The number which we have is
close to
346.
No, the number GDP growth, GDP size is close to 300 billion now, but it should have been around about 325, but we sort of devalued our currency, so and that's okay, so I won't get into that. Long story short, you asked about sustainability. Now, sustainability does happen if the policy remains intact, robust, and it is calibrated according to the situation, and a quarterly review of our policies is helpful. Number 2, if the economy keeps on moving, if the economy does not have to go through any transfusions, it does not have to go through any organ transplants, you just keep the economy purring. That's how growth starts to happen. This is something very ironic. You don't have to do anything big. You just have to just let the economy work. What's happened in Pakistan is what people...
And when you say let the economy work, what exactly do you mean by that?
For example, if the economy is stabilizing and work has started to happen, and suddenly you see transactions have started to increase, then
do not interfere.
Just let it happen. Do not bring about any interest rate changes suddenly. Whatever you do, economies are managed very gently, very carefully. Nothing sudden, nothing outrageous. Keep it predictable. As long as we keep things predictable. Right now we've seen a spate of violent attacks. Have you noticed where they've happened? in economic areas.
Absolutely.
So once again,
Anarkali in Lahore,
the point that I'm trying to bring up, which I've been bringing up at the government level, which I used to bring up in the corporate level, is that we have to contain this violence. Now, it has an economic face to it. If, I repeat, perhaps just for clarity's purpose, that if the government can maintain policy, if the economy can just be allowed to work, and gradually interest rates have to be brought down, very slowly, they have to be brought down, you will see an acceleration in the economy, not a deceleration. And gradually we have to start managing our rupee rate a little more carefully, go immediately into barter markets, then you see the growth that we're going to experience. We have to institute certain new mechanisms, nothing outrageous. Some of them might even sound primitive, like barter markets at border areas.
Iran, Afghanistan,
Both. So that would really ease the pressure on the financial markets, and suddenly you would see a lot of additional transactional activity. So it is sustainable, of course, but these caveats are relevant not only to Pakistan that I've raised, they're relevant to any other country on earth, developed or developing, that you have to maintain these things. This is how the laboratory of economics works. You cannot allow these things to go. One day, if you have a policy that points in a particular direction, you cannot overnight have a policy that takes a 30-degree turn. Sometimes we've seen a 180-degree turn, so you can well imagine that's not, a minor adjustment is fine. Our growth will be far more than this. This is nothing. Right now, many people might find this hard to believe, but as I said in the beginning, if the government has rebased something, it is probably based on some fact. But of course, we have to be a little vigilant, we have to monitor, and right now, let's just be optimistically